We know that he and his family, oh, thank you, are struggling a little bit tonight, so we would appreciate that.
Absolutely. Please join me in prayer. Gracious God, we ask that you send your spirit to be here with the mayor and commissioners this evening. Lord, we ask that you also send your spirit to be in the community and town of Newberry. Lord, this evening we pray that your spirit will guide thoughts, conversations, and decisions that are made regarding the people who live here and those who come to be with us for special events. Lord, we pray that all the decisions that are made and the conversations that are had are both pleasing to you and are in the best interest of the people who live, work, and play here. Lord, we pray for your blessings on this community, for the people, for the families, for the children, for the businesses. Lord, we ask that you come into the lives and you help them find peace, and that this is a community where joy and love is spread. Lord, we do lift up John Glanzer to you and ask for your special blessing on him this evening. May your healing hand be upon him and be with all those who are taking care of him. Lord, we pray all of this in your precious name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Pastor Karen, and thank you also for the use of that really wonderful picturesque pumpkin scene there. I've already seen kids and families using it, so we appreciate the loan. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to our first proclamation tonight, which is recognizing Florida City Government Week. We've done this now for 2 or 3 years. I lose track of time. It's my city. I'm part of it. I'm proud of it. I encourage the commission to participate in it if you're available. It's a chance for us to bring all the kids out and show them a little bit about what government does. Let them play on the fire truck, and the what's the truck? The utility bucket truck. Thank you. Those are always the big winners, so don't expect to be the center of attention because they'll be on those trucks. But whereas on October 21st through 27th, 2019 has been declared Florida City Government Week, and whereas Florida City Government Week is a special time to recognize the important role played by city government in our lives, and whereas Florida City Government Week is a time to spread the word to all citizens of Florida that they are an integral part of the government that is closest to the people. And whereas City Government Week is part of an ongoing effort sponsored by the Florida League of Cities to raise public awareness about the services that cities perform and to educate the public on how city government works. And whereas cities provide a higher level of service than most governments, and yet many residents are unaware of how city services affect their lives. Now, therefore, I, Jordan Marlowe, Mayor of the City of Newberry, by virtue of the authority vested in me as Mayor of the City of Newberry, in the state of Florida, do hereby proclaim October 21st through 27th, 2019 as City Government Week. Invite all citizens to participate in my city. I'm part of it. I'm proud of it. On Thursday, October 24th, 2019 at the Alachua County Newberry Branch Library at 3 p.m. Signed this 14th day of October 2019. I encourage you all to come out. It is a lot of fun, and really thank you, Madam Clerk, for taking a leading role in putting that on. We appreciate you. Okay, and now we'll have an update from our planning department from Mr. Brian Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the commission may remember, staff was asked to give some regular updates on the different departments, and tonight is my pleasure to give you an update on some of the activities in the planning department. And so just a brief overview, the planning functions, we process comprehensive plan amendments, land development regulation amendments, which are things like rezonings, subdivision phase review, and the list goes on. There's quite a few things. I won't get into too much detail. We'll talk a little bit about each one. Some examples of our recent comprehensive plan amendments. Greenfield Daycare, they bought the property from DCC Church and needed to be rezoned to a category, change of land use and rezoning for their facility. And so we assisted with that and got them through it. And then also, every time you annex property from the county into the city, we've got to change the land use on it from county to city designation. We process those. Similar with land development regulations, especially the annexations we rezone to city. But we also have worked with some other groups. Again, the daycare rezoning, the agricultural event center, which we're all excited to bring out here to Newberry in conjunction with the county. Picture there is our newest small animal boarding facility that joined the city of Newberry because we were accommodating in our willingness to work with them on some code changes that they needed to facilitate their needs. Well, if you don't mind swimming with the dogs. We review subdivision phases that come in as they're ready. We review for compliance with the layout for the land development regulations, but also to work with other departments like utilities and the fire department to make sure that the infrastructure is being constructed as code requires. For commercial developments, we typically don't have platting, but you have they're done approved by site plan, and so when a new commercial development comes in, we review the site plans before they come to the commission for their approval. Special exceptions, those are things that are not allowed necessarily by right, but can be approved with additional conditions established by the commission. We had a little over 300 acres of annexations. You can see the larger areas in the blue because our community is so large on a square mile basis. It's hard to see at scale when it's blown up, but we've got the Pet Paradise off to the east, and then we've got the bulk of the 300 acres to the west. And we brought those in this year. We processed variances, special temporary use permits, various activities you see it there. We occasionally will do a certificate of appropriateness for some structure that's in the historic district, and various miscellaneous applications that come in on a regular basis. Up until a few months ago, the planning department was also tasked with grant work and administering the grants for the city. And so during that period, we did obtain the Small Cities Community Development Block Grant for the housing that you've been briefed on a number of times now. We had the closeout for what's called the FERDAP grant, which is a recreation grant for some additions or improvements rather to the MLK Junior Center. And we had been granted a special category historic preservation grant to do some substantial work over at the Little Red Schoolhouse. Unfortunately, because of Hurricane Michael, that fund and quite a few others were appropriated by the legislature to the recovery effort, as I think we all think would be appropriate. And then just on a daily basis, we get a plethora of questions, inquiries, all kinds of different things, from what can I do to my property to, does the city enforce neighborhood covenants and restrictions, which, by the way, the answer is no. And so those, we figure we probably, on average, go at least 2 to 4 of those types of inquiries a day. They just constantly come, and it's our duty and pleasure to answer those questions for the citizens of Newberry. Your staff, as most of you know, I think, is comprised of 3 people. You've got the director, you've got the principal planner, and an assistant. As you might notice, the attire is the same. And so, the photographer would like credit. He's over there. Out of about 15 shots, this is the only one that was usable. Our city manager could use some training, perhaps, in photography. Anyway, we also provide staffing for the Economic Development Department, some with codes enforcement, and the building department. All your staff members in the planning department are members of the American Planning Association. Wendy and I are both members also of the American Institute of Certified Planners, which we're proud to say that I think this probably puts a community the size of Newberry in kind of rarefied air, in that both of us have AICP, and only less than 40% of all professional planners, they tell us, have the AICP credential. And one of the great things it's cut off the word there, but you have mandatory certification or continuing education to maintain that AICB credential. And that assures you that we are always learning about best practices in planning, and especially the AICP credential requires a very high standard for ethical behavior and practice. And so our goals for next year, basically, we're looking at comprehensive plan and land development regulation overhaul to streamline our, at this point, very dated comprehensive plan and land development regulation documents. We are working on a citywide parking regulation amendment as directed by the Commission to fix some problems that we've got going on out there. Turns out to be a little bit bigger task than we might have realized when we first started down that road. All planning applications are going to be reformatted and put online, available on the city website, so they're fillable and can be emailed directly in. And then, of course, we, as always, continue to streamline procedures and processes with the intent of providing consistency, but also to speed in process delivery for the residents and the customers. So, if there are any questions?
Questions from the dais? Commissioner Martin?
I thought maybe, I don't know if it was formal, talked about trying to do some of the very low-hanging fruit permits and such automated online. You pay, you get printed out. Is that on the radar too?
We are working on that. The building department, the city has obtained what they call a citizen, not citizen link, but there's the name for it, that'll allow people, contractors and people applying for building permits and things to go online and do it all online. And that's also a direction that we're going to move with the planning processes as well.
We've also, out of the P&Z in this body as well, has supported a couple of efforts to move to staff level approval on some low-hanging fruit. If I'm in an industrial park and I've got, it's a pretty cookie cutter, why make someone work through that entire process? So I know we've taken one of those suggestions to completion. I think we're still in the middle of moving another one of those to fruition. So hopefully we'll see that soon. Any other questions or comments from the dais?
Okay.
Brian, do you have any, I know this body probably gets wind of it every time something goes wrong. Do you have any numbers, what our average turnaround is for permits, and average turnaround time is for an inspection, those kinds of things?
Mr. Mayor, if we're talking about planning processes, each one's a little bit different, but we strive, and I can say throughout pretty much this year, have exceeded our anticipated turnaround times. We to get them reviewed and back out. Building permits, I would say we're probably in the 80 to 90% range in terms of meeting our guidelines. There are a few outliers that we're still working to improve on in the process. It'll make it move faster. But generally speaking, the feedback I get from people that do developments outside of our area as well, but in the general vicinity, is that they prefer to work with Newberry than just about any other community. So because of the attitude of the elected body that's welcoming to new businesses and development, as well as the staff adopting that same welcoming attitude and customer service emphasis.
Okay. Thank you. If there are no other questions or comments, I have a proclamation to read. To recognize October as National Community Planning Month. This one's a little lengthy, so bear with me if I need a sip of water in between. Whereas change is constant and affects all cities, towns, suburbs, counties, boroughs, townships, rural areas, and other places. And whereas community planning and planners can help manage this change in a way that provides better choices for how people work and live. And whereas community planning provides an opportunity for all residents to be meaningfully involved in discussions regarding the future of their community. And whereas the full benefits of planning require public officials and citizens who understand, support, and demand excellence in planning and plan implementation. And whereas the month of October is designated as the National Community Planning Month throughout the United States of America and its territories. And whereas the American Planning Association and its professional institute, the American Institute of Certified Planners, endorsed National Community Planning Month as an opportunity to highlight the contributions sound planning and plan implementation make to the quality of our neighborhoods and environment. And whereas the celebration of National Community Planning Month gives us the opportunity to publicly recognize the participation and dedication of the members of planning commissions and other citizen planners who have contributed their time and expertise to the improvement of the city of Newberry. And whereas we recognize the many valuable contributions made by the professionals, planners, and volunteer planning board members of the city of Newberry, and extend our heartfelt thanks for the continued commitment to public service by these professionals and residents. Now, therefore, I, Jordan Marlowe, Mayor of the City of Newberry, Florida, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2019 as Community Planning Month in the City of Newberry in conjunction with the celebration of National Community Planning Month. Signed this 14th day of October 2019 and attested to by the Clerk of the City Commission of the City of Newberry, Florida. Thank you, Planning Department. We appreciate it. Well-timed. And the board, absolutely, and the P&Z board. We appreciate everybody's work. Okay, that will bring us to a time in the night for public announcements. These are 2-minute announcements that are the non-controversial type. Let us know you got something going on. We'll participate in it. Seeing and hearing none, we will move to our first, we'll move to consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as it was published? I have a motion from Commissioner Coleman, second from Commissioner Hersom. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. I just read a really long proclamation. Give me a break. Okay, now we'll move to first agenda item, which is the AMI update. Mr. New.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you'll recall, in our last meeting, we received a report and presentation on the AMI project that we've been working on. AMI stands for Automated Metering Infrastructure. At the time, the Commission expressed a desire to wait until we had a full board, so we postponed consideration of that. The request by staff was we were seeking authorization to move to phase 2 of the engineer of record or engineering services contract, phase 2 being the bidding and negotiating process. We finished phase 1, which is development of an RFP. Phase 2 is the bidding and negotiating phase, and then if there's a phase 3, it would be deployment of the infrastructure into our community. The end of phase 1 is an off-ramp. We've made an investment, but we've also got a pretty good idea of the project that we're going to get and the budget. I was pleased that after going through a very, very defining development of the RFP document, that we didn't have our budget lose control. Actually, we came right back in with where we thought we were supposed to be for the project, and our consultants from Quanta Technology actually calculated it 2 different ways, and they felt like that the deployment costs were going to be in the $1.2 million range, which is what we budgeted all along. So, and I should give props to both FMPA, and they're represented by Mike McClear tonight. He's in the audience. He drove up from Orlando. He's here to answer a question. Quanta Technologies is North Carolina based, and we pay them for travel. So we paid them once for travel to come and make that presentation last week, and felt like that Mike and I would handle it tonight if the commission has any questions. I've loaded up their presentation with no intent to go through it necessarily unless the commission would like for me to. Again, our request, the recommended action, is to authorize the city manager to execute a contract with Quanta or to proceed into phase 2 of the AMI project.
Okay, this is a big project. Been a lot of excitement. Commissioner Hersom was not here, but he's had a chance to review that presentation at this point, so I don't think we need to go back through the entire thing again. But if there's any, now that we have a full board, any last questions, comments? If there are none, we'll hear a motion.
So, and there's our recommended action up on the screen. Sorry for fumbling that earlier. So it's a 2-part recommended action. It's one you see on most of our outside contract work. It's authorize the manager to execute an agreement with FMPA to provide phase 2 services for the AMI deployment, not to exceed $109,000 also to authorize city manager to execute change orders in an amount not to exceed 10%.
Do we need two motions or just one?
You can make
Just
one
one.
motion with those two
So moved.
steps. Okay, so I have a motion from Commissioner Farnsworth, a second from Commissioner Martin. Now, I'll take questions on the motion on the floor, comments on the motion on the floor from the dais? Commissioner Norfleet.
I like the AMI system. The only concern that I have with the system would be if you have some older meters and stuff that ain't, that might not be as accurate, that these systems, you know, the fluctuation of people getting a higher bill for the first couple of months until they get used to it. So that's the only concern I'd have for it.
And we're aware of that. I think, you know, we've planned a pretty extensive community outreach program to kind of let the community know what the expectations should be as this comes forward. My experience, the electric meters are all solid-state meters. We don't anticipate that's going to be an issue. Water meters, that can be an issue from time to time, but typically not with groundwater utilities like the city of Newberry. In my experience, when we've taken out 20 and 30-year-old meters and we test them, they test fairly close to what they should be, whereas if you're using a surface water that has grit or, you know, some suspended solids in it, typically you tend to see, I've seen those meters be 25, 30% off. So I think it's a great comment. I think it's something for staff to keep on the forefront of our discussions with the public as we move forward with this project, to make sure there's not anything unreasonable. Typically, on a billing end, if people have disturbingly high bills, we usually are happy to work with customers to kind of ease into it, and they can work on changing some of their habits, and we can make a time extension to help make sure that the payments aren't going to be overly cumbersome for them.
Commissioner Martin.
Mike, is this a situation where we can roll out different parts of the city as we go along, or is it all live all at once, or is it stepped in, so to speak, and we can turn on, troubleshoot, turn on?
Historically, these projects have been deployed where we would do kind of a beta set, where we might do 10% of the meters in town to prove its reliability before we move forward. Our consultants have indicated that the trend has been in the last two or 3 years is rather than do 10% of your live customers, they're building what they call a meter board, which simulates live customers, and we get it right on the billing board. Because at all times while you're not fully deployed, you're having to run your billing partially through the new system, partially through the old system. It is very cumbersome and confusing. So it might cross 2 billing cycles to get full deployment, but we're going to try to deploy as rapidly as possible after we're sure that the test board is functioning properly and we've got it right.
And the projected go-live timeframe?
We anticipate now it's going to be late spring or summer before we go live. 2020.
Any other questions from the dais? Commissioner Hersey?
Is that, I guess, questioning the timing, is that historically a low water consumption time period? So if there are shocks to the system, it's not as large a shock?
It is not historically a low water consumption period. Typically, by the time we get to June, we've got enough rain that people have curved back on their irrigation, or they've had enough bill shock that they've curved back on their water consumption. Our big months are April and May. Those are the real dry months for Newberry. I think that's a really good offering. Typically, this project has slowed down a little bit. If you saw our initial projected timeline, we thought we'd be deploying maybe in January. A lot of the slowdown was simply getting it right, you know, under the premise that it's better to get it right than to get it fast. And so we've taken an opportunity to slow down, get the right amount of feedback, get it figured out properly before we take those next steps. So I wouldn't be surprised if the deployment doesn't push back a little bit, and maybe we decide we are going to push back deployment a little bit to make sure we get through that high consumption period. But when you get past high water consumption period, then you move into the heat of the summer where you have high electric consumption period.
But isn't one of the hallmarks of AMI the ability to look at your consumption in real time?
Absolutely. That is to me the biggest single strength. It is way more efficient for city staff to operate this system, and some utilities move this way over cost savings and improvements in efficiency. I think that one of the most inspiring things about Newberry's project is the recognition by our commission and our staff that the empowerment that we're giving customers over their ability to see their consumption on almost real time, within hours, is super powerful, and I think that's going to be the biggest benefit to our community.
Any other questions or comments from the dais? Hearing none. Any questions or comments from the public about automatic metering infrastructure? Very exciting initiative to empower our residents to take control. Okay. Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Say unanimous. All right. Motion passes unanimous. Thank you, FMPA. We appreciate all your help on this. It's been 2 years now we've been working on this. So you have stuck with us, and we do appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. All right, next up is Newberry Main Street Fall Festival adult beverage permit. Welcome, Ms. Wendy.
The application
Don't
before you.
forget to introduce yourself.
Oh, I am Wendy Kinzer, Principal Planner for the City of Newberry, Planning and Economic Development. This next application that you have before you is based on the Fall Festival coming up that Newberry Main Street is doing on November 23rd. So they've applied for a special permit to be able to sell alcohol. And essentially the permit itself deals with any kind of property that's publicly owned or maintained or on private property. Whenever you have like an outdoor event of this nature, then it is required to have a special permit from the City of Newberry. And as you see on the slide, that our own ordinance deals with those and provides for a special permit. And the state also has a permitting process to allow for alcoholic sales, and the Newberry Main Street has applied for that. That is in progress. They have also attained their special permit, temporary use permit for the event itself, the Fall Festival. That's been approved, and they have applied for the local road closure for Seaboard Avenue, Seaboard Drive, and that's been approved as well. And the permit itself is set for, they've asked for the Fall Festival. The thinking is that these are the kind of events that have happened frequently, typically a one-day event, maybe 3 times max during the year that Main Street's involved with. And the thought was to make things more streamlined, to issue a 1-year permit to cover 3 one-day events. And just from starting today, if you were to grant the permit, and that would provide for that. They still, any organization, as in this case, has to apply for a special event permit, a special temporary use permit to have the event itself anyway. So no matter what event, so for example, the West Fest, if they were to be serving alcohol and selling alcohol there, as they did last year, that would be a 1-day event, and that West Fest also attains its own special event permit, so as an example. And then this is the area that shows you on Seaboard Drive where the festival is to take place. Yeah, see, jump back there. Oh, gotta go back. All right. Next slide. So the recommendation of staff for you is to approve the special permit for a period of 1 year to allow Newberry Main Street to sell beer and wine at 3 permitted special events. And I have listed the Fall Festival and the date and the West Fest Music Festival date, and there is a possibility of a 3rd event that we are providing for. But remember, they still have to get that special event permit. The city's regulations charge you with the ability to hear these kinds of permits, and you may, if you choose to grant that, you may also add additional conditions as well as how they're listed here. Typically, the way, in the event that you approve it or deny it, the application, the people are notified of the application being, let me start over. The action that's taken on that application is provided in a letter and with any conditions that you ask for and approve. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Does the commission have any questions? Commissioner Farnsworth?
Now, this just gives permit to Main Street Organization, doesn't give permission to like a booth that has set up in the organization? That they have rented out a booth to somebody or a food truck or anything?
The permit is given to Newbury Main Street. If they work with like one of the, like World of Beer or those kinds of places, or First Magnitude or Swamp Head, sometimes they will do an agreement with them, but usually that money is donated, or most of it is donated to the organization or to a charity. But they are working that out. Newbury Main Street ultimately is responsible, so any other, working out any of that still is contingent upon the state permit and any other permit. And I'm thinking that they are here if you have any questions for them directly.
Do you want to know if they're thinking about working with somebody or doing it themselves?
Well, they say that moonshine still.
Ah, okay. Any other questions or comments from the dais? Commissioner Martin?
This might be a question for the city attorney. That is it, instead of having an ongoing event coming back to the city every year requesting a special permit, is there a way to fashion something that says if you've had an event for 5 continuous years, that you automatically get one moving forward, or is there any way to frame out parameters that are agreeable to that kind of direction?
I think we could certainly do that if we wanted to fashion it that way. I mean, under the ordinance that Wendy cited, I mean, the commission has the ability to put whatever conditions or restrictions they want on this particular permit. Would somebody challenge that? I don't know. If somebody were to challenge that, we'd probably take another look at that to see if that's something we'd want to bring back to the commission at some point, or if we would want to stand on it as is and say, no, it's a valid permit. And
I understand the commissioner's point. I mean, this is the 3rd or 4th or maybe 5th year we've had to kind of go through this whole rigmarole, so maybe spend a little time thinking about how we could write that up to where, our existing organizations that have these events, that do these things on a continual basis, could maybe get a little bit longer of a permit. Any other questions or comments from the dais? Okay, I'll entertain a motion if anyone wants to offer a motion to approve. Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Farnsworth and a second from Commissioner Coleman. Go with that. Any questions on the motion on the floor from the dais? Does the public have any questions on the motion on the floor? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passed unanimously, and we are on to the legislative agenda. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is another one of those things that we do every year, but I understand why we can't just do it. Every year, the commission adopts items that they would like for staff to pitch with the state and federal legislative team on Newberry's behalf. We are going to, we have a presentation? Oh, yeah, thank you. I forgot about that. So this year, staff report, we've identified, I think, 19 or 20 items. I'd like to ask staff recommends that we refine it to no more than 5 or 6. Most of the ones that we had from previous years are repeats, so they're at the top of the list. But if we could go through the list rather briefly, or not briefly, take your time, and you guys determine which of these alternatives for legislative action items. We'll get them worked up into our handout sheet, and we'll be taking them to Tallahassee every time we go this year, or every time we meet with the legislature, whether it's in Tallahassee or locally. So the first 5 are listed there. I would say that 1 and 2 are repeats and were previously listed by the commission in last year's. 3's new. We got some feedback from some folks in Tallahassee that said what you really want to focus on is the different pots. So if you have 3 requests from the same pot, your best day is to get one of them. And so the second and third are just, you have to decide which is your priority, and that's what you would get. But there are other pots, recreation being one that we haven't attempted to do anything with. We've applied for FERDAP grants, but the state legislature has not funded FERDAP for 3 years, but we're seeing other communities get these appropriations. Item
Mike,
number,
but
yes, sir.
before you move on with 3, we've had a lot of folks in the community obviously talk about splash pads, but it's been a while since we pulled that information out. Now, before we send you off with that as a top 5 focus, I think the commission would want to think about the ongoing maintenance costs, where's it going to go, all of those kinds of things before we list that in the top 5. Do we have that information readily available?
Not readily
tonight.
available. And Mr. Mayor, that brings to mind one of the most important things that I should have said is that it may take us 2 meetings to get there. You know, sometimes we have good robust discussion, but we don't set the 5 projects we want. Staff does some more legwork, and then we move forward. So the reason that moved in at number 3 on staff list is not because we value it as a number 3 project. Whatever number 3 used to be, it went away. It was the funding for the Little Red Schoolhouse, and we weren't on the list this year, so there was no sense in asking them to fund that. So I just plugged it in there. That was probably a mistake on my part. The item number 4 is similar to 1 and 2 in terms of it's the same pot, but we're looking for grant programs to reduce nutrient loading on the aquifer. It's one of the most pressing things in the environment environmental issues right now is nutrient loading on the aquifer, nitrogen reduction, phosphorus reduction.
Mike, when you say 1, 2, and 4 are coming out of the same pot, does going for one of them successfully reduce our chances of success at another one of them? If we're...
Yes, sir, and my mistake, 1 is not from that pot.
Okay.
2 and 4...
And 4 would be from the same pot.
And 5 would be from the same pot.
So I recently had a meeting with a company. Do you remember their name, Mike?
I do. I can't recall it, but that specifically generated item number 4 in my mind. There's a local company that specializes in nutrient removal programs, and they've had good success in getting design and construction funded for
100%.
100%.
And they identified Newberry as a better applicant than some of their other clients. And I can't remember exactly why. We're in the basin that is where the state is targeting. There's a lot of technical reasons that they were saying why 4 they feel like they would be very successful at. Commissioner Martin?
Mike, have you or anybody on staff talked with any adjacent communities about partnering with us on any of this stuff? Or is any of that stuff on their radar? I'm just thinking in the mind of a legislator, they want to knock out as many chunks. The more vote buying they can do, the better on their end.
Well, absolutely, and I didn't mean to cut you off, Commissioner Martin. You want to finish that thought? I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay. The item 5, the feasibility for development of regional wastewater treatment systems. We've had extensive discussions with other communities and with the Water Management District and with the state, and we have not gotten any traction on
With
that
the other
issue.
communities, you said?
With the other communities.
Well, that is actually the one that I was kind of thinking about, and the only other parallel thought that I had was, it seems with Governor DeSantis's propensity to kind of look at some of these environmental stuff with kind of a renewed vigor. I almost feel like they may come across doing some of those things on their own, to where I don't necessarily want to waste an agenda item for us on that if we think they're going to do it on their own anyway. Is that, do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, sir, I do follow you.
Well, Mike, 4 and 5 kind of cancel each other out. If we do
Correct.
1, we don't really need 4. If we do 4, we don't really do 5. We have tried at 5. I've gone to the city of Archer and presented personally to them. Mike has gone and presented personally to them, and we just have not been able to move that needle. So I would say to strike 5 and to shoot at 4, which we seem to, everyone thinks there's a pretty good chance of success on that. And we're looking at about $4 million
Correct.
grant on that one.
Is there anything with regards to the new ordinance for nitrogen in fertilizer that's going to impact number 4 to begin with, that the county's implementing next week? For the July
No.
through November time period, I think?
No, sir. No, Mr. Mayor. Now, this is an area of county focus and is an area that I believe the county has jurisdiction. But this is a statewide issue. One of the biggest obstacles for regional treatment, and just a little bit of background, 20 years or so, the environmental community wanted to remove nutrients and then send reclaimed water through distribution systems out, and we were going to irrigate people's lawns with it and save on domestic potable water. And that has just turned out to be extremely expensive. Maintaining distribution systems and building distribution systems is expensive. So the current legislative mindset or regulatory mindset is if you pull it out of the ground, you remove the nutrients and put it back in the ground, then that's just as good, which is significantly cheaper to your community. The problem with regional treatment is if you get 10 communities that pull it out of the ground where they are for their water system, and they pump it to a regional plant, which treats it and removes the nutrients and puts it in the ground there, the regulatory community has a problem with, hey, you're not putting it back where you pulled it out. That's been one of the stumbling blocks. The Water Management District has particularly identified that as a problem. So what this new technology is, we can put in what they call a constructed wetlands, which isn't overly expensive, and it's not overly expensive to maintain. It's simply a big infiltration basin with the right type of bacteria and vegetative material in it to remove nutrients before it goes straight back down into the ground. That lends itself to non-regional types of facilities, so it's going in the ground where it's being pulled out of the ground. That's why it's become such a hot mover in the environmental community, is because they don't feel like you're depleting an area of groundwater, you're putting it back. And Mr. Mayor, I should point out that, I just couldn't put it all on one page. There are multiple pages, and I'll move along whenever the commission feels like they're comfortable with these 5.
Well, and I know that 2 and 3 come out of the same pot, but I think that 2 we have a high level of chance of success on. I feel pretty confident in 4. I think 1 is going to take a little bit more work on our part to lobby for, but I think those are 2 things that we could 2 and 4 we could recognize success on this year if we keep pushing. We're right there on number 2. So let's go through the other ones, Mike. And
So the next 5 are to do with the state road, which is a different pot of money. That's State Road 26. And really, all we're asking here is now that you've made it a project DOT and you've allocated money for design and property acquisition, they just haven't allocated construction dollars. We want them to go ahead and plug in the year that the $30 million that they need for construction dollars is in the pipeline, so that we can see when this thing will start. And that gives it almost finalizes that this is a done deal. It would take significant action for it to stop that project once it gets funded for construction. Then the next one, again, is a DOT program, and it's really just to fund what they call the TAP program. There's an evaluation project, we turn in lists, projects we've not gotten funded in the last 5 or 6 years. Those programs need funding if we're ever going to realize dollars out of them. Ready status helps us in some grant opportunities if we're a ready community. We don't qualify simply because we're in Alachua County. So the first bar you got to clear is your county has to have certain demographic. Ours doesn't. And there doesn't seem to be a category for very rural city like we are in a very urban county like Alachua County is. And so we've been designated ready once, but the very huge benefit that Newberry probably isn't realized there. The next one has to do with helping our economic development to reduce the requirement for poverty zones. We'd be able to show more poverty zones if they do that. Here's number 10 again, which is a joint project with Archer, which is very similar to number 4, and we don't seem to be getting any traction. And then probably a little bit vaguer, home rule type projects, hold harmless. If the state lowers its tax revenues, which happened about 2 years ago, the state was going to reduce some revenues, and it's going to have a significant impact on cities. Funding for municipal fiber optic is kind of a trend. They're seeing more and more of what they call rural fiber projects. So there's some funding out there. We're keeping an eye out for it. If we get more funding out there, it'll be advantageous to Newberry potentially. Rails to Trails project, at least for now, we think it's dead. CSX pulled out. Restore the electric generating plant, be a really nice project for Newberry. Funding to develop a farmer's market, and we're talking about a permanent facility, pole barn, dressed up nice pole barn. There's some examples out there in the state of Florida. I think the most impressive one that's not gaudy is Mariana. They've got some funding, and they did a super nice farmer's market in their downtown area. Support funding for schools, school construction in western Alachua County. That supports the school board, of course, but we live in this community, and we know how tight the schools are. And as I understand it from the school board, they're usually only in the queue for about one school at any time, and they need to be looking at 2 or 3 schools at any time, and so that's what that item is in there for. You guys selected that last year or the year prior. Home rule again is 18, and number 19 is a technical assistance fund to update our land development regulations. Our land development regulations are 14, 15 years old, or older? Older. The industry standard is turn them around every 10 years, excuse me. Cost estimate to turn ours around, redo them, about $120,000. And the level of effort is on the magnitude of what we've done in charter review. So big project, but if we want to stay current with the times and ripe for good economic development, we have to look at our land development regulations and update them periodically. We have to do the same with our comp plan. That's staff's list.
I thought you had 20, so not one more slide?
No, I would have.
Okay, just 19. Okay, so what I would suggest is not necessarily trying to go through these 19. Everybody sleep on it. I absolutely agree that we should try to limit ourselves to 5 things that we send up there, but sometimes even less is better. If they just have, the things they can focus on, they don't have to spend, you get 20 minutes in this meeting. If you got to split it up between 5 things, that's, less time for the things that you really want to make sure they know that these are what's important to us. And at the next meeting, we come back with our top 5 list. That sound like a good plan? Okay, does the public have any questions or comments on anything on this list? Okay, here now we're going to move to Charter Officer annual evaluations. Now, you have these in your packet. This is pretty much the same way that we did it last year. I'm not asking you to do anything tonight. What I want you to do is to look through that packet. Unless anybody has an objection to, after, not tonight, but after you've had a chance to look through the packet, objection to the process, then I will expect you at the next meeting to come back with those evaluations filled out. If you want to give me a call Wednesday or Thursday of this week and say, wait a minute, I think we should do something a little bit differently, we'll change up the agenda item and we'll talk about how we should handle our evaluations at the next meeting. Otherwise, we'll look at the actual evaluations. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, I think that.
Did I say that wrong?
In order to help our human resources staff compile the scores, if we could get them in by, say, next Wednesday, which would be Wednesday the 23rd, that'd give staff a chance to compile the scores so that they can present the commission with, here's the compilation of scores prior to coming in the meeting, and then we're trying to tally them on the spot, if the commission's okay with that.
Well, and it has been a struggle to get through all of these. So in my mind, what I was thinking was you would drop them off at that meeting. That would give staff 2 weeks to tally everything. At the next meeting, we'd come back. But if you guys can get it done by next Wednesday, assuming, again, we don't have any objections to the actual process, that's perfectly fine. Does the commission have any? That's true. Tournament Friday, and that's before Monday. So, it's all well and good when we're up here, but then we get to the deadline, and I'm texting people saying, "Hey, don't forget." I'm not looking at anybody in particular. Wednesday is fine. I mean, my suggestion was just bring them to the next meeting. We just drop them off. There's no urgency here. We drop them off. That gives staff 2 weeks to tally up the numbers. You're already coming up here for a meeting anyway. You don't have to schedule another meeting to come. That was my thought. So, good either way. Okay, so you guys will let me know by the end of this week if you look through this packet and say, hey, I don't think we're going through this process right. As long as I don't hear any of those objections, then at the next commission meeting, you guys will bring back the completed forms, and we'll just drop them off there, and then we'll go into that at the next meeting. Is that right? Okay. Any other questions on officer evaluations? Public have any questions or comments on officer evaluations? There's 3 charter officers, the city manager, city clerk, and the city attorney. Okay, moving on to item 13, which is Alachua County tobacco minimum sales age to 21. We have an attorney here, right? City attorney. Take us through the county's ordinance,
I'd
which
be
will
happy
take
to.
effect next week.
October 22nd, next Tuesday. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, just by way of brief introduction, Andrea is going to walk us through some of the components of that ordinance, but really, in the end, what we're looking for is maybe some direction from the commission as far as whether they want the city attorney to go back and put together a proposed opt-out ordinance for the commission to consider a future meeting, or whether they would prefer to us not do that. So that's sort of the background, and Andrea will fill us in on what the components are of that ordinance to see if this is something that interests the commission.
Good evening, Commissioners. As you're aware at this point, the county has passed Ordinance 2019-04, which is known as the Tobacco Minimum Sale Age 21 Ordinance. And the highlights from that ordinance are essentially it prohibits the sale of any tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, to any person under the age of 21. It also requires any business to obtain a distribution license from the county and pay an annual license fee to sell tobacco products. Any business within 1,000 feet of any public school is prohibited from having a business license to sell tobacco products. It also authorizes the county or a designee to conduct random and unannounced inspections. And the penalty with those inspections would be, with the first violation, there's a 7-day suspension of your license. Within a 24-month period, the second violation causes a 30-day suspension. The third violation would be a 90-day suspension. And the fourth violation within a 24-month period is a revocation of that license. And this ordinance goes into effect next Tuesday, October 22nd. Within the ordinance, it does allow an opt-out for the county or for the municipalities. So it says that the ordinance applies to all in unincorporated Alachua County and incorporated Alachua County unless the municipality chooses to opt out. Essentially, in order to opt out, what we're looking at is Florida Statute 166.021. And in order to opt out of an ordinance, we need to state a valid municipal purpose, which a valid municipal purpose is defined relatively broad in the statute. It's any activity or power which may be exercised by the state or its political subdivisions. And so we're seeking guidance from the commission tonight on how you'd like to proceed, given that this goes into effect next week.
So we have an ordinance that will force every business owner in the county who sells tobacco products to join a registry, get a permit, is that
That's
that
correct.
right?
You have
Do
to
we know the
apply for a
cost of that
license
permit?
annually.
that license?
I do not know the annual cost of the license.
You know it, Rich?
There's a,
We believe it's $230.
$230 a year, or once you have it once, you're done.
it's annual.
Annual? So $230 a year, you purchase this new permit to sell this product. And this only regulates sales, not possession?
It regulates the sale of tobacco, correct?
Okay. Okay, I know this is a sensitive topic. Anytime you're dealing with something that, you know, is as dangerous and harmful as tobacco, talking about it is difficult. But this clearly is also a home rule issue, and that's why we are discussing it. Because if we want to go along, we'll need to understand what this does to local businesses here in Newberry. We need to do our due diligence before we proceed. So any comments, thoughts, questions on this, Commissioner Martin?
Richard, the affected stores in the city of Newberry, since what I'm hearing is the ordinance is going to go into effect on the 22nd, we're not going to have an opt-out ordinance by then. Are they going to still have to get it for potentially 2 weeks if the meeting afterwards were opting out of it?
I think that erring on the side of caution, that yes, they would need to do that.
Mr. Mayor, I would just offer that failure to obtain this would put you into their code enforcement program, and in which case, you know, they're trying to get you into compliance. So if you, as you're going through that code enforcement, it wouldn't immediately put someone in jail. It would give you notice that, hey, you're not in compliance. I believe that we can opt out if the commission desires to opt out by resolution or by ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, it would be by ordinance to
Okay.
be safe. That'd be the best way to do that.
And one approach may be there too, is to do it sort of in tandem. We could do a resolution that we would say takes effect immediately. The purpose of a resolution is something that's a little more temporary in nature, and then follow that up with an ordinance. But we would recommend that ultimately, if this is the direction the city would like to go, that we have this, you know, for 2 readings with the ordinance route. But we could proceed that with a resolution on a temporary basis.
We couldn't do the resolution tonight, but we could have the resolution by the next meeting. And I think this board could give clear message to where we're going.
2 days after that.
Right. But I think if this body is clear on the direction, I'm not sure that 6 days is enough time. You know, I think the whole county is kind of in a state of confusion about how you're going to enforce this, what's this going to look like on the ground. I know that the county is hiring a company to manage this through their growth management department. That company has some projections on their profit margins for the management part of it. So I'm not sure if they're ready to go on implementation date, or if they're going to need, if we can get it done in the 6 days, that's going to be well within a window. Any other thought, Commissioner Coleman?
I'll make it short and sweet. You put a gun in a man's hand at 18 years old and tell him to go fight for his country. The age as an adult is 18 years old. I'm not for anybody to take, I know, to take on and start doing any tobacco. But this is totally overreach of government, and this is infringing on our home rule. And so I will be voting to opt out.
Other questions, thoughts? Commissioner Herson?
Yeah, I do not support the use of tobacco. I'm not a tobacco user, but I also believe that the county's ordinance they're passing, while in their press release today stated 90% of tobacco use starts before the age of 18 and only 95 starts before the age of 21. So by pushing the purchase age to 21, they're not fixing the problem that they've identified. And so I think it's them trying to make themselves feel good and, at worst grandstanding for the public, but certainly not addressing the underlying issue of tobacco use for underage people. So I think, with that increased cost, expenditure, and regulation, and the violation of home rule, I would not support the ordinance at all, and would support against it, and would vote against it, or vote for opting out.
Okay. Other thoughts? Commissioner Martin?
Well, there's also the other considerations of the fact that, I know you mentioned before, the person doesn't necessarily just go in to buy tobacco. They're buying soda, they're buying other things. We're geographically 2 miles, 3 miles from a store just over the county line, which deprives our stores that are paying taxes here the opportunity to sell all that other stuff. I'm on the same page with them as far as home rule and personal choice goes, as well as being against tobacco. I don't do any of that. Actually, very few people that I know even handle any of that anymore. And I think it is just theatrics. I think it's primarily lip service, and as Commissioner Herson said, it doesn't really address any kind of problem, and it's frankly not a problem I think the county should be addressing anyway. So I'm supportive of opting out. Just on a whole host of things, you can choose the one that you want.
Other questions? Commissioner Norfleet?
I agree with them, but I'm just kind of curious if you happen to know, the county doesn't do any sort of enforcement on the current age that they got listed here, do they?
I know that they have the ability to conduct random unannounced inspections. I don't know how often they go about doing that, or if it's I'm not sure what the procedure is.
Does it, Commissioner Martin?
If I'm not mistaken, I believe actually I may be thinking about alcohol. I think they do with the sheriff's office maybe does something with alcohol, but actually tobacco, I'm not sure.
Commissioner Herson?
Just one comment. And this ordinance is preventing the sale of tobacco to anyone under the age of 21, but it does not prevent the possession of tobacco or use of tobacco under the age of 21. That's correct.
That's correct. It's preventing the sale of tobacco.
Sale of it, but it is still legal to have it.
Yes.
And does the state already regulate the sale of tobacco? Do you already have to have a permit to sell tobacco products at the state level, tobacco and alcohol? I believe the answer is yes,
I think so.
but I'm not 100%.
Yes, you have to have a permit from ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms.
Okay, so the state already legislates it. Any other comments from the dais? I've heard 4 say we should direct staff to write an opt-out ordinance, and do we want a resolution at the next meeting giving more concrete certainty to that motion as we work on the ordinance? Because the ordinance will have to go through 2 readings.
One thing I would just advise the commission on here is that if the notion is that we are heading towards an ordinance of opting out, and there's some concern for local businesses having to potentially apply for pay the fee and that sort of thing immediately, which may only be a very temporary thing for them, I suggested a few minutes ago, a resolution preceded by, or followed by the ordinance. Typically in this situation, I would say, since we sort of have a consensus here, I think we understand what the city attorney's office needs to do. We'd come back with something later on. But here I would actually suggest that maybe there be a motion made, because the ordinance, the county ordinance, it doesn't specifically say that the opt-out has to be via resolution or ordinance. So again, out of an abundance of caution, if the commission would like, they could entertain a motion opting out of the ordinance tonight, followed by a proposed resolution on a short-track basis, and/or the ordinance, obviously, for 2 readings.
Okay, so you're saying we'll have a motion to opt out tonight. That will give clear direction, and then we can bring back the ordinance.
That's correct.
That's true. Their request doesn't include what form the opt-out has to be. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
And my assumption was that you could do this just with a motion. So the ordinance to me seems to be an abundance of caution. I'm not against it, but I think it's a motion and a vote from this body.
And the reason the city attorney would recommend ultimately that the ordinance be passed is under our charter, an ordinance is defined as official legislative action. And so that's ultimately what we would like to have in place if the idea is we want to opt out. So a motion would start us in that direction, and we'd ultimately have an ordinance that says that.
And the only other comment that I would want to make that you guys haven't already made is that I did get a question that I want to respond to. And the question was, how can the city of Newberry be at the forefront in the fight against opioid addiction and not be supportive of raising the age from 18 to 17? Isn't that hypocritical? My response to that would be that we have 2 separate issues here. If you compare tobacco and opioids, you'd have to compare opioids to tobacco in the 1940s or 50s, when tobacco companies were lying to the American public and telling them that tobacco was not harmful, when they were actually putting things in to the tobacco to make it more harmful. That's where we are with opioids right now. I think we're starting to see the opioid companies themselves go to court because they've been lying to the medical institution about how addictive those substances are. I don't know anybody in America who doesn't know that tobacco is bad for you. It's common knowledge. We all know that tobacco is bad for you. We know the dangers of it. So if an 18-year-old adult makes a choice to do something that's bad for him or her, that's what being an adult means. That's in my view, it's not comparable to the opioid crisis, where we still actively have industries misleading the American people about the level of addiction. And our opioid initiative is about raising awareness. It's about doing with opioids what has been done successfully with tobacco. So I just wanted to go ahead and put that response out there. I agree with everything you guys have said here tonight. I hope that every kid out there makes the decision not to smoke. But I would also remind that we're not talking about kids. We're talking about 18-year-old adults with this. Okay, and with that, before we open up to public, does anyone want to make a motion? I have a motion from Commissioner Martin to...
Yeah, I would make a motion to opt out of the ordinance as defined earlier.
Okay, and I have a second from Commissioner Coleman. Was that a hand up for a second? Okay, does the guys have any last questions or comments on the motion on the floor? Does the public have any last questions or comments on the motion on the floor?
Jessica Rosinski Baker, citizen. So the one question I had that wasn't touched on with the commissioner comments, Mr. Mayor, is one of the sections of the ordinance said that if they were in 1,000 feet of a school, it would be a ban, so they wouldn't be able to get a permit, and that would probably affect at least one of the businesses. So if we don't have an ordinance, will the motion be enough that, code enforcement, if you don't have a permit, but if you're not allowed to have a permit, could they potentially come in and just tell them no sales if there's no ordinance in place?
I think the motion would give us some amount of protection while the ordinance is working through. Is that?
That's correct. Yeah. The motion should provide some protection in that regard to the particular business that we're talking about. I would suggest if there is a code enforcement issue with the county, I'm not sure who that business is offhand, but I would suggest that maybe they contact our office so we can walk through that scenario.
And Mr. Mayor, to give additional information on that, with the code enforcement process, the above and beyond the violations that cause a suspension after so many violations, 7, 30, 90 days, et cetera, it's an automatic Class 5 violation, which is a mandatory court appearance up to $500 fine. So, as Rich said, we probably need to contact us so we can make sure we walk them through the appropriate steps to avoid codes enforcement if possible.
Okay. Okay, are there any last questions from the public on this? You came out just to talk about this. You want to voice your support or opposition to the direction that the commission is contemplating?
Evening, Mr. Mayor,
Good evening, sir.
Commissioners. Chris Rose. I'm not a stranger to many of y'all up here, so it's good to be back with y'all again. I fought the county pretty hard on this last year. I think I talked to them a total of 3 times on this. I see this as a revenue generating scheme and little else. You can sell just about anything you want in proximity to a school, but there's already an age limit on those products. It doesn't matter if the school is there or what's there. A middle schooler, a high schooler, I guess there are some seniors that are 18, is not going to be able to go in there. So it's just adding more restrictions upon already state-regulated products. I support you in this motion. Government exists to protect the rights of the people, not to run their lives. And this is just a gross overreach, as already has been stated by the county, to incur more tax revenue and to further encroach into private businesses. So I support you in this motion. Thank you for doing the right thing.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment? So my last comment is that if the federal government wants to contemplate raising the age of adulthood from 18 to 21, that's a conversation I would be willing to have. Okay, if there's no other comments from the public or the dais, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. And that brings us to comments, City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess the first thing I wanted to discuss is local option fuel tax. Just briefly to apprise the commission on where things are with that. As you know, about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, the county and the city of Gainesville entered into a 10-year agreement that would determine how the local option fuel tax was going to be divvied up, and that what they did with the 8 smaller cities is they took 9.2% of those revenues and they divvied them up by population and by road miles, an average of population and road miles. So for 3 cities, Alachua, Newberry, and High Springs, those cities would see an increase in gas tax revenue over a 6-year period. But for 5 other cities, they were going to see a decrease in revenues. And while those decreases haven't been realized yet, they begin in fiscal year, or in January of 2020, those cities have asked the county to reevaluate it, the formula for distribution of those taxes. And state law requires that the distribution formulas, or the distribution be reassessed every 2 years. So we're kind of on that cycle anyway. The gist of the ask right now is to restore it to the old distribution percentages that no one really knows where they came from. They're 30-plus year old. This is a 10-year agreement, and and I've got this. It's a 10-year-old agreement. They run for 10 years, and that we're in our 4th cycle now, so that we've gone through 3 full cycles. The city of Newberry did our research, started looking at this some 10 years ago, about that they determined that by population and road miles was not getting a fair share of the revenues. And the county staff advised the city that, hey, your time to address it is at the 10-year cycle. So we waited until 2017, the end of the 10-year cycle, and we brought up the issue, and were successful in getting Gainesville and the county to distribute the small city revenues by road miles, an average of road miles and gas tax. So now we're reevaluating it. Here's the state law, not that we should read that, but there's a couple of things. Right now in Alachua County, the state law says that it's an interlocal agreement between the county and one or more municipalities that comprise the majority of population in an incorporated area. So there's the county and Gainesville have taken the bare minimum of that statement and say that Gainesville does comprise that. But it could be one or more, so that there could be 9 parties in the agreement or more than that. And we've asked that question is why not have another city or two or all of them at the table for the negotiation? And then the state law speaks to a distribution formula as opposed to just random selection of allocation or distribution percentages. So that's kind of where that is. I was just going to say this is, you may remember this from 2 years ago. There were 7, the county came up with 7 common ways for distributing local option gas tax based on population or road miles or an average of those two or the amount of prior year's expenses on road maintenance, either through an FDOT method or from an accounting method, and then an average of that, and then based on RTA or collector miles. So of those 7, those are the 7 common methods. In most cases, Newberry was receiving an unfair share no matter how you did this. So, so what the county was proposing back in 2017 was a distribution where Newberry would receive 1.25% of the revenues. What they ended up with was selecting method 3, which is an average of population of road miles. Newberry's percentage increased to 3.71, almost a 3-fold increase, or what the city had been some 20 years in deficit of. So I'd mentioned before, we're in a 6-year step-in. What they selected is identified there. Year 1 was 2019. We're coming to the end of it. No change. We're still at a significant deficit based on road miles and population, but over the next 5 years, we will make up that difference, assuming we stay with the current formula. So the reason I was bringing this to the Commission's attention was simply to, we're meeting, the small cities are meeting next week to discuss this issue, and I wanted y'all to be aware that this was going on and just get, it wasn't a published agenda item, but get some feedback on your thoughts about how Newberry should go in to the meeting. There's some thoughts that Alachua, Newberry, and High Springs should, out of generosity, just return to the old ways because Hawthorne and Waldo and some of the other smaller cities just need the revenues. And I don't think that anybody is sympathetic to a small city trying to find revenues. We struggle with that every year during budget, and I've seen this board make a lot of tough decisions about what are we going to do for revenues, unpopular decision, because we know that we need to maintain infrastructure. So, but that meeting is going to happen in next week, and I wanted to get some direction as to what this commission's preference was before I go into that meeting, and we try to come up with a scenario where we have fair allocation of funding that is based on some rational methodology. I would point out that one of the things that I think is a bit of a struggle is that when you look at the allocations, and you can see, I'll back this thing up, there you go. Right here, if you look at the allocations, Gainesville is going to receive, they receive right at 40%, Alachua County receives 50%, and then the rest of us split up 9.2%. So if the 8 smaller cities, if the smallest cities are going to receive additional revenues, it's not coming from a Gainesville or Alachua County. It's coming from a Newberry, High Springs, and Alachua. And it seems like what they ask is that the mid-sized cities subsidize the smaller cities, and the two biggest parties by 20-fold. They're both receiving 20 times the revenue that any of us receive, are not in the fray. And I'm not asking for this to be a bashing of them, but I think that if we want to address a revenue shortage to the smallest cities, I think it shouldn't be on 3 mid-sized cities. I think it should be on maybe the 5 largest cities, or possibly or entities, or the 2 largest entities would also be at the table. And with that, I'll kind of conclude my comments and just solicit feedback.
Well, and we all knew that this conversation was coming because by state law, the county is supposed to come back to this distribution formula every 2 years to reevaluate its fairness and efficacy. And I would say the reason that we're in the boat that we're in now is the failure to do those 2-year markers. And the fact that you're supposed to do this every 2 years, to me, implies it by its very nature that it's based on population and road miles, because those would be the 2 things that would fluctuate the most over the course of time. Now, but just to be clear, right now, the distribution among the 8 municipalities is road miles and population. So what we want to decide is, do we send Mike back into that manager's meeting saying we're very comfortable with the current distribution? We think that this is fair. We can defend it. We can look our residents in the eyes and explain it to them. And that we're also still willing to consider anything else that we also deem as fair, but we're not going to consider just, emotional arguments. That's kind of the direction that we need to give to Mike. Where are we headed with this? I would absolutely support the creation of a letter that we circulate among the 8 municipalities and send to the county commission saying that the 8 municipalities can unify around making the road miles and the population a county-wide formula, and it would apply to everyone equally, and then just about every entity in the county would receive more funding. Only one entity in that situation would lose. And I believe that that is a unifying measure. I believe that we have a clear path to success with that measure. So far, I haven't been able to convince the other municipalities to truly get behind it. But because we're coming up at the first 2-year marker, that's kind of why everyone's getting more engaged or re-engaged in this conversation. It's sat dormant for 2 years, just so everybody knows. As soon as the county voted for this distribution, I called up the mayors of 2 or 3 of those cities that were going to have funding redistributed, and reaffirmed Newberry's commitment to continue to look at anything that made sense, and we would get behind something that made sense. To date, not one of those cities has offered an alternative methodology or an alternative strategy, except let's just go back to the way it was before, which nobody can explain why it was that way. I have offered 2 strategies that would bring us together, and I haven't got a whole lot of traction on either of those strategies. So that's kind of where we are right now. Mike has to go into the manager's meeting, so we just need to let him know what you guys think. Commissioner Coleman?
Don't give in, bend, but don't break.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Herschel?
I would support the idea that we've got to have a logical distribution, and population and road miles seems to be the most logical opportunity to find something. So I would agree with Commissioner Coleman. We can bend, but we're not going to break that. Road miles and population are what should be driving the decision.
Well, and per state law, can you go back to that state law, Mike?
Absolutely.
Just leave it on it. Per state law, there has to be a distribution. And going back to the way it was previous, a formula, there was no formula. We have dug and dug, and we cannot find one record of how the original percentage distribution was established.
Correct.
Any other thoughts that are different from Commissioner Farnsworth?
Not anything different. I know that the city manager worked really hard to get this set up and get it passed the first time, so I have no desire to go back to where we were before. I think that, if anything, we deserve more, so it's only fair to our citizens who are paying those taxes anyhow.
Other thoughts, comments? Commissioner Barton?
I agree. The entire city staffs of all the cities spent a lot of time dealing with this already. It's not our fault that they failed to prepare accordingly. It's not a surprise that this was coming up. I mean, the whole step-in process was intended for this exact situation. And quite frankly, it just so happens that we do get a bump in the distribution, but that doesn't mean that that's going to continue for the next couple of years or the next 5 years, because who knows, somebody's city could make decisions that grows their city. But the formulation makes sense. I don't even know that there's been a whole lot of turnover in the city bodies who made this decision to begin with. I don't even know that there's been very many elected officials who are now on boards or on commissions that weren't there before. So it's not as if the players at the table were changed. They're just griping because now they've got to actually move, and their knee-jerk reaction, when it should have been planning accordingly, is now just let's go back to the way it was before. And I don't accept that excuse on behalf of our citizens, plain and simple. So my direction would be to stay where we are at right now. And if they're going to come up with, if they want to offer something else, I don't have any problem entertaining it at all. But until they do, I think the formula is what the formula is. If there's other cities that want to give up their part, that's on them. They're more than entitled to do that. They can stroke that other city a check if they want. But as Commissioner Farnsworth said, if our citizens are paying the tax, we've kind of been getting the short end all these years. So it's not as if it wasn't due our citizens all along to begin with.
Commissioner Norfleet?
Yeah, I don't really see where you need to cut it any, but one question I have on it, though, I was kind of curious. The formula that y'all worked out on this, does the city of Gainesville and Alachua County participate in that formula?
No, sir. They work on 91.8%. They argue about the distribution of 91.8%. And how that's going to go. I think the county would embrace population and road miles. Gainesville raises their hands and says, well, we're a little bit different animal. We run a transportation system that none of you do. And I think, what I've learned from the transportation engineers is, okay, that is an asterisk that might deserve some consideration, but they don't pay attention to any of the widely held formulas. It's just a straight negotiation for them. They may use those formulas as the starting point, but because it's only between two parties, they each carry a lot of power. The county cannot pass this unilaterally, and if they don't like it, what Gainesville offers, then the county doesn't have to pass it at all, and then we're just all without those revenue streams. The nice things about any type of sales tax in Alachua County is that some 80% of the dollars spent in Alachua County are from county residents. The other 20% are from non-county residents that are using our transportation systems while they're visiting for a Gator football game or something. So sales tax is always a preferable way to get tax dollars to maintain infrastructure that is being used by outsiders, as opposed to, say, property taxes, where there's a lot of people that aren't owners of property in our county that would then be 100% responsible for road maintenance. But there is an option for the county to not have this interlocal agreement, for this not to be a thing. I don't think we'll have that discussion again for another 8 years.
But that is, and I'd be willing to draft up a letter that we could take to the boards of the other 7 municipalities that basically speaks to that point, that Newberry is comfortable the way we are now. If those cities want to spearhead an effort to get the county to to impose this formula equally across the board, Newberry would certainly support that, because that would be the fairest way to go about it. And I don't mind drafting up that letter. Wouldn't take any staff time to do so. Would the commission be interested in me doing that? I mean, it gives everybody something, I think, to unify behind. Right now, I think kind of the idea is, well, maybe if we can divide up the 8 smaller municipalities and get them going at each other, then the 2 bigger fish in the pot will just keep on going, you know. And really what we need here is a county-wide conversation about the equity of this distribution.
Sure.
Okay, any further comment,
No, sir.
questions on?
I got the feedback I need to go into that meeting. Obviously, if there's a decision to be made, that'll come back before the board for consideration.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'll go much quicker through my remaining items.
All right.
As you know, some 4 or 5 years ago, this commission asked us to try to do something that was related to vocation. Vocation fair, which career fair, not to be confused with a job fair, where we try to get employers matched up with employees. This was a kind of a vocational career fair. It's been, Amy typically spearheads it with our planning department and our economic development department, I should say. And this year's was at Newberry High School. We had 37 different training organizations that offer vocational certification. It's our best turnout, our best show ever. Amy's going to give you a presentation on that. I just wanted you to know that it was a huge success. We're also going to have a presentation on the city being recognized for the FMEA Building Strong Communities Award. That's the 4th year in a row that we've been recognized with this award. It's related to our level of community engagement and outreach programs we have in our electric utility. We're going to be transitioning to a new agenda management software. So these will look similar, but they will be different. It's a move towards technology and efficiency. It's really going to help out on some of the back office stuff that we're doing to prepare these agenda items. Special thanks to Judy Rice and to Dallas for their leadership in getting us on this project. It's been no simple task. It's required all hands on deck. We are recognizing breast cancer awareness this month. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and the city takes an active role in it. And the city has provided each of our elected officials with this really cool T-shirt, which is displayed. It was displayed on our website today in a city photograph, and very popular item. We've had a number of requests for those T-shirts, so I think next year we'll order some extras, make them available to the community on a sales basis, and we'll donate the proceeds to the American Cancer Society. I've been invited to speak about Newberry to the Gainesville Area Realtors Association at their annual leadership retreat. That's at the end of the month. They're excited. They have this amazing impression of the exciting things that is happening in Newberry, and they invited us out to speak to them. 2 more items. On October the 29th, City of Alachua is hosting an ethics training for elected officials. I think you all are aware of that. And then the last item is very good news. During the budget process, we told you that the property appraiser indicated to us that they thought our taxable revenues were going to be higher than taxable property values were going to be higher than was certified, and that we thought we'd realize another $140,000 in additional revenues. We have confirmed that with them since we've made it into October. They have confirmed that, and that number is actually higher still. It's 160. So you identified several projects that you wanted us to include in the budget. If that came to pass, you'll see a budget amendment coming shortly, next meeting or two, so that we can go ahead and recognize those realized revenues and include those expenses, those planned expenses. And there'll be, whatever the balance is, will be, let's put it into our savings account, or there may be another project or two that the commission may be interested in us going ahead and taking on. So just wanted to share that exciting news. That concludes my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mr. Attorney?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In addition to the October 29th Alachua County Ethics Training, I may have already mentioned this, and you'll probably hear this again from us, but we have a save the date of December 5th for our ethics, 4-hour ethics training that we'll offer at our office from 4 to 8 p.m. So that'll
Cheese and crackers,
cheese and crackers,
ribeye steak.
ribeye steak. What else you got? Any,
Hey,
you name it, we'll bring
You
it.
said ribeye, so I wanted to quit while I was ahead.
That's all I have.
All right, thank you, sir. Madam Clerk? I don't have anything. Thank you, ma'am. Commissioner Coleman?
I got two things. Starting tomorrow night, the girls volleyball team, because they had a bye tonight for being number one in the district, so they're playing in the districts. It starts tomorrow night.
And we're hosting districts, right?
And we're hosting it. It's here in Newberry.
Awesome.
So I'd like to see everybody be out there for that. I won't be there because this community comes together better than any community I've ever seen in my life. Tomorrow night, it's sold out. If you didn't already get tickets, the Kelly Wyckoff benefit at Clark Plantation, it was all over TV 20. And the girls had a volleyball tournament. I don't know how much they gave on that, but it's just unbelievable how we're, coming together with such, bad stuff that's happening. And with this being Breast Cancer Month, I just hope that everybody will keep her in your prayers. And if you bought tickets, I'll see you tomorrow night. That's all I got.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Herson?
Yeah, I have an announcement that may not be the greatest secret in town anymore. Recently, I was asked to apply for an administrative position at Clemson University, and I've accepted that offer to be the director of the Simpson Research and Education Center. My position there is going to start in January of 2020. This is a significant career and opportunity and professional promotion for me. And my position as a Newberry City Commissioner and the friendships that we've developed over the last 16 years in Newberry has made this decision to leave my job at the University of Florida more difficult. We moved to Florida. When we moved to Florida, we chose to live in Newberry, and it was one of the best decisions that we have ever made as a family. We're blessed to have had our children grow up in Newberry and attend an excellent school. In May, we will proudly have 2 graduates in Newberry High School. I value all the friends that we have in town, and I value all the things that I've learned as being a city commissioner, and will forever appreciate the responsibility the citizens of Newberry have trusted in me. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the citizens of Newberry. I look forward to watching Newberry continue to flourish as it pursues its opportunities to improve its life for citizens. But I will certainly continue to execute my duties until January. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We are absolutely going to miss your service up here. We know that family always comes first, but we will miss you here. So before we all get choked up, I'm going to move on to Commissioner Farnsworth. Commissioner Farnsworth, Commissioner Martin.
I just wanted to extend my heartfelt appreciation for the support of the recent Kelly Wyckoff fundraiser that I had done with my somewhat infamous, I guess, Thomas Jefferson costume. So if you were watching and you supported that and donated, I greatly appreciate it, and look forward to giving her the money tomorrow night. So thank you very much for anybody who helped with that, whether it was financial or otherwise.
Commissioner Norfleet.
I just want to congratulate you on your promotion at Clemson, and thank you for your service here in the city on the commission, and we're going to, I think we just, all of us will miss you. Keep in touch.
I think he still may be traveling on a couple of trips with the student group here in the future. But I know his wife anyway, right? I have just a few, just in case you haven't heard, the Newberry High School football game has been canceled for Friday. That's 2 this season. So I don't know the reasons why this one has been canceled. I think it's just our reputation, right? I want to congratulate the Lady Panther golf team. They placed 3rd in the district today, which earned them the right to travel on next Monday to play in the regional competition. So they worked really hard for it, had a tough beginning to the match, but did not let that get to them. They came back on the back nine and earned that spot. I want to just piggyback on what Commissioner Coleman said. This town is amazing, from commissioners humiliating themselves in 95-degree heat dressed up as founding fathers, to benefit dinners, to our young people putting on things when one of us is struggling. We really do come together for everybody. I just wanted to clarify on the evaluations, because I always do, but I forgot this time. The mayor will not be filling out that form. I'm a non-voting mayor, so the charter officers' evaluations will be decided based on the 5 voting members of the commission. And just to remind everybody, the procedure when a commissioner has to resign, cannot fulfill the finish of the term, is that the mayor will appoint a position and appoint a name, and the commission will then vote on that name. Now, Commissioner Hersom is able to stay with us and through the first meeting in January, I believe. So we have plenty of time to work through that process. And I'll certainly be talking to the commission and talking to the residents about that, but I have no intention of coming anywhere near that decision in any time soon. Everybody just take a breath and reflect, and we'll have plenty of time to figure that out. And that concludes my comments. Public comment.
Good evening, Lisa Tate, citizen, and here with Main Street. Just wanted to give you an update. Everyone's pretty well aware that Main Street has decided to remain intact and move forward. I did want to mention that the downtown decorations was a joint effort this week with Newbury Main Street, the Garden Club, and the Watermelon Festival Group.
And they
I
look
think
great.
They did a great job. I unfortunately was out of town and didn't get to participate, but I did drive around today and think they look wonderful. There was one thing, and not really an answer I'm expecting here, but is the lighting of the Christmas tree. We move into that season. We'll try to get some information and see what we can do to help with that. The Firehouse Gallery, I think it's going to go through some changes. I hope they're going to be exciting things and everybody will be happy with what the vision remains a little bit to be seen, but we have some ideas that I think will be good for the city, good for the community, good for the groups that are supportive here. Just reminding the festival, I know it's come up a couple times, is 11:23. We are extending the hours this year, 9 to 6, to encompass the food court going a little later, and the beer and wine garden. I also understand that the rodeo then follows that, so hopefully we can kind of get just coordinate that so people can come here at 7:30 in the morning.
It's going to be a great day in Newberry. They can just stay. Festival during the day, rodeo at night.
Right. The farmer's market, just to let you know, the vendors have opted to extend their hours to 8 o'clock at night instead of 7. So I know our signage.
That will be helpful for me. I'll make it there by then.
Well, they talked about doing 5 to 8, but some of the vendors still wanted to come at 4. So we just said, you know what, it's up to y'all. So
there you go.
We're going to do 4 to 8. Our signage may not reflect that tomorrow. I'm trying real hard to get that, but we've gotten it all posted and everything like that. And congrats, Commissioner Hersom. I was totally unaware, so it was under my mushroom leaf or something. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Other citizen comments?
Just a reminder, Commissioners, next Monday night, October 21st, Charter Review Workshop, 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. We've got some. Is it 7 o'clock? Yeah, 7 o'clock. That we pushed all of the heftier, weightier items to Monday's meeting. So if everybody can be there, that'd be great. I don't know that we will get through everything that night because we pushed all the heftier items. So if you haven't had a chance to watch the video of the first charter review, we kind of put all of the stuff that we didn't change much, or was pretty straightforward in that meeting. You can just sort of review it. I think I've had a chance to talk with most of you about that, but the weightier, meatier issues will be handled on Monday. So the Charter Review Committee has done a lot of work to send that to you guys, and we are on an ever-pressing timeline if we want to get this charter onto April's ballot, which is one of the questions that you guys will have to decide. You don't have to put it on April's ballot. It's just something that we need to consider, but it's probably the most logical goal at this point, okay? Any other public comment? Hearing none, we are adjourned.